Before we begin, if you're finding peace through these sessions, we'd love for you to take a moment, when you're awake, of course, to leave a review and subscribe on whatever channel you're listening on. Your support helps others discover this space and join our journey to restful sleep. Welcome to Slothful Slumber, the podcast where we transform the vast knowledge of the internet into a gentle lullaby for your mind. I'm your host, Luna Dreamwell, and I'm here to guide you on a journey to tranquility through the soothing cadence of Wikipedia articles. Each episode will delve into the most wonderfully mundane and sleep-inducing topics, helping you drift off into a realm of serene dreams. So find your comfortable space, close your eyes, and let the dull hum of information carry you into a restful slumber. This Wikipedia article is titled Referendum. A referendum, plebiscite, or ballot measure is a direct vote by the electorate, rather than their representatives, on a proposal, law, or political issue. A referendum may be either binding, resulting in the adoption of a new policy, or advisory, functioning like a large-scale opinion poll. Etymology. Referendum is the gerundive form of the Latin verb referre, literally to carry back, from the verb ferre, to bear, bring, carry, plus the inseparable prefix re, here meaning back. As a gerundive is an adjective, not a noun, it cannot be used alone in Latin, and must be contained within a context attached to a noun, such as propositum quod referendum est populo, a proposal which must be carried back to the people. The addition of the verb sum, third person singular, est, to a gerundive denotes the idea of necessity or compulsion, that which must be done, rather than that which is fit for doing. Its use as a noun in English is not considered a strictly grammatical usage of a foreign word, but is rather a newly coined English noun, which follows English grammatical usage, not Latin grammatical usage. This determines the form of the plural in English, which according to English grammar should be referendums. The use of referenda as a plural form in English, treating it as a Latin word and attempting to apply to it the rules of Latin grammar, is unsupportable according to the rules of both Latin and English grammar. The use of referenda as a plural form is posited hypothetically as either a gerund or a gerundive by the Oxford English Dictionary, which rules out such usage in both cases as follows. Referendums is logically preferable as a plural form, meaning ballots on one issue. As a Latin gerund, referendum has no plural. The Latin plural gerundive referenda, meaning things to be referred, necessarily connotes a plurality of issues. It is closely related to agenda, those matters which must be driven forward, from ego to impel or drive forwards, and memorandum, that matter which must be remembered, from memoro to call to mind, core agenda, from rego to rule, make straight, those things which must be made straight, corrected, etc. The term plebiscite has a generally similar meaning in modern usage and comes from the Latin plebiscita, which originally meant a decree of the concilium plebis, plebeian council, the popular assembly of the Roman Republic. Today, A referendum can also often be referred to as a plebiscite, but in some countries, the two terms are used differently to refer to votes with differing types of legal consequences. In Australia, a referendum is often said to be a vote to change the federal constitution, and plebiscite, a vote which does not affect the federal constitution. However, this is erroneous, as not all federal referendums have been on constitutional matters, such as the 1916 Australian conscription referendum, and state votes that likewise do not affect either the federal or state constitution are frequently said to be referendums, such as the 2009 Western Australian Daylight Saving Referendum. Historically, they are used by Australians interchangeably, and a plebiscite was considered another name for a referendum. In Ireland, plebiscite referred to the vote to adopt its constitution, but a subsequent vote to amend the constitution is called a referendum, as is a poll of the electorate on a non-constitutional bill. History. The name and use of the referendum is thought to have originated in the Swiss canton of Graubünden as early as the 16th century, after a reduction in the number of referendums in the mid-20th century. The referendum as a political tool has been increasing in popularity since the 1970s. This increase has been attributed to de-alignment of the public with political parties, as specific policy issues became more important to the public than party identifiers. Types, classification. The term referendum covers a variety of different meanings, and the terminology is different depending on the use. A referendum can be binding or advisory. In some countries, different names are used for these two types of referendum. Referendums can be further classified by who initiates them. David Altman proposes 4 dimensions that referendums can be classified by: mandatory, legally required, versus optional, ad hoc; binding versus consultative; citizen-initiated, bottom-up, versus authorities-initiated, top-down; proactive, proposing a change, versus reactive, preventing a change. Mandatory referendums. A mandatory referendum is a class of referendum required to be voted on if certain conditions are met or for certain government actions to be taken. They do not require any signatures from the public. In areas that use referendums, a mandatory referendum is commonly used as a legally required step for ratification for constitutional changes, ratifying international treaties, and joining international organizations, and certain types of public spending. Typical types of mandatory referendums include constitutional changes. Some countries or local governments choose to enact any constitutional amendments with a mandatory referendum. These include Australia, Ireland, Switzerland, Denmark, and 49 of the 50 U.S. states. The only exception is Delaware. Financial referendum. Many localities require a referendum in order for the government to issue certain bonds, raise taxes above a specified amount, or take on certain amounts of debt. In California, for example, the state government may not borrow more than $300,000 US without a public vote in a statewide bond proposition. International relations. Switzerland has mandatory referendums on enacting international treaties that have to do with collective security and joining a supranational community. This type of referendum has only occurred once in the country's history. A failed attempt in 1986 for Switzerland to join the United Nations. War referendum, a hypothetical type of referendum first proposed by Immanuel Kant, is a referendum to approve a declaration of war in a war referendum. It has never been enacted by any country, but was debated in the United States in the 1930s as the Ludlow Amendment. Optional referendum. An optional referendum is a class of referendums that is put to the vote as a result of a demand. This may come from the executive branch, legislative branch, or a request from the people, often after meeting a signature requirement. Types of optional referendums include authorities plebiscite, also known as a legislative referral, are initiated by the legislature or government. These may be advisory questions to gauge public opinion or binding questions of law. Popular initiative or initiative referendum, a citizen-led process to propose and vote on new laws. Popular referendum, a citizen-led process to oppose and strike down existing laws. Recall referendum, a procedure to remove elected officials before the end of their term of office. Depending on the area and position, a recall may be for a specific individual, such as an individual legislator, or more general, such as an entire legislature. Rationale. From a political, philosophical perspective, referendums are an expression of direct democracy. But today, most referendums need to be understood within the context of representative democracy. They tend to be used quite selectively, covering issues such as changes in voting systems, where currently elected officials may not have the legitimacy or inclination to implement such changes. By country. Since the end of the 18th century, hundreds of national referendums have been organized in the world. Almost 600 national votes have been held in Switzerland since its inauguration as a modern state in 1848. Italy ranks second with 78 national referendums, 72 popular referendums, 51 of which were proposed by the Radical Party, 4 constitutional referendums, 1 institutional referendum, and 1 advisory referendum. By issue. Civil rights referendum. A civil rights referendum or human rights referendum is any act of direct democracy which allows for a vote on the granting or amendment of current civil rights, liberties, or associations as recognized by a government. Such referendums have frequently been proposed as a means by which the majority of the voting public in a polity, rather than the judicial or legislative chambers of government, could determine what the state should recognize or carry out. While such referendums have been strongly criticized by civil rights organizations and professional bodies as means by which the majority of the public could vote on the rights of a vulnerable minority according to contemporary prejudices. Financial referendum. The financial referendum, also known as a budget referendum, is a form of the referendum and an instrument of direct democracy. It always relates to parts of the public budget of a government and allows citizens to vote directly on individual budget items. Mining referendum. A mining referendum is a direct and universal vote in which an entire electorate is invited to vote on a mining proposal. Mining referendums have been held in Tambo Grande, Peru in 2002, Esquel, Argentina in 2003, and Cuenca, Ecuador in 2021. In each of the three cases, the local community rejected the establishment of new mines in their territory. Independence referendum. An independence referendum is a type of referendum in which the residents of a territory decide whether the territory should become an independent sovereign state. An independence referendum that results in a vote for independence does not always ultimately result in independence. Referendums related to the European Union. This is a list of referendums related to the European Union, or referendums related to the European communities, which were predecessors of the European Union. Since 1972, a total of 48 referendums have been held by EU member states, candidate states, and their territories, with several additional referendums held in countries outside the EU. The referendums have been held most commonly on the subject of whether to become a member of European Union as part of the accession process. Although the EU does not require any candidate country to hold a referendum to approve membership or as part of treaty ratification. Other EU-related referendums have been held on the adoption of the euro and on participation in other EU-related policies. Design and procedure, multiple choice referendums. A referendum usually offers the electorate a straight choice between accepting or rejecting a proposal. However, some referendums give voters multiple choices, and some use transferable voting. This has also been called a preferendum when the choices given allow the voters to weight their support for a policy. In Switzerland, for example, multiple choice referendums are common. 2 multiple choice referendums were held in Sweden in 1957 and in 1980, in which voters were offered 3 options. In 1977, a referendum held in Australia to determine a new national anthem was held, in which voters had 4 choices. In 1992, New Zealand held a 5-option referendum on their electoral system. In 1982, Guam had a referendum that used 6 options, with an additional blank option for those wishing to campaign and vote for their own 7th option. A multiple-choice referendum poses the question of how the result is to be determined. They may be set up so that if no single option receives the support of an absolute majority more than half of the votes, resort can be made to the 2-round system or instant runoff voting, which is also called IRV and PV. In 2018, the Irish Citizens' Assembly considered the conduct of future referendums in Ireland, with 76 of the members in favor of allowing more than 2 options, and 52% favoring preferential voting in such cases. Other people regard a non-majoritarian methodology like the modified Borda count, MBC, as more inclusive and more accurate. Swiss referendums offer a separate vote on each of the multiple options, as well as an additional decision about which of the multiple options should be preferred. In the Swedish case, in both referendums, the winning option was chosen by the single-member plurality, first past the post system. In other words, the winning option was deemed to be that supported by a plurality rather than an absolute majority of voters. In the 1977 Australian referendum, the winner was chosen by the system of preferential instant runoff voting, IRV. Polls in Newfoundland, 1949, and Guam, 1982, for example, were counted under a form of the two-round system, and an unusual form of TRS was used in the 1992 New Zealand poll. Although California has not held multiple-choice referendums in the Swiss or Swedish sense, in which only one of several counter-propositions can be victorious, and the losing proposals are wholly null and void, it does have so many yes or no referendums at each election day that conflicts arise. The state's constitution provides a method for resolving conflicts when two or more inconsistent propositions are passed on the same day. This is a de facto form of approval voting, i.e., the proposition with the most yes votes prevails over the others to the extent of any conflict. Other voting systems that could be used in multiple-choice referendum are Condorcet method and quadratic voting, including quadratic funding. Electronic referendum. An electronic referendum, or e-referendum, is a referendum in which voting is aided by electronic means. E-referendum employs information and communication technology such as the Internet, e-voting, or digital telephones, rather than a classical ballot box or traditional methods system. Traditionally, e-referendums are organized by governmental bodies, but nowadays there exist private companies that can facilitate online referendums or other types of e-voting. Quorum. Quorums are typically introduced to prevent referendum results from being skewed by low turnout or decided by a motivated minority of voters. Participation quorum. Referendums may require a turnout threshold, also called a participation quorum, in order for the referendum to be considered legally valid. In a participation quorum, a majority of those voting must approve of the referendum, and a certain percentage of population must have voted in order for the results to be approved. The usage of participation quorums in referendums is controversial, as higher requirements have been shown to reduced turnout and voter participation. With high participation quorums, the opposition of a referendum has an interest in abstaining from the vote instead of participating in order to invalidate the referendum results through low turnout. This is a form of the no-show paradox. All others who are not voting for other reasons, including those with no opinion, are effectively also voting against the referendum. In the 2005 Italian fertility laws referendum, opposition to the proposed loosening of laws on research on embryos and on allowing in vitro fertilization campaigned for people to abstain from voting to drive down turnout. Although a majority of people voted yes for the changes in the law, the results were invalid because participation was low. Disputes. Important referendums are frequently challenged in courts. In pre-referendum disputes, plaintiffs have often tried to prevent the referendum to take place. In one such challenge, in 2017, the Spanish Constitutional Court suspended Catalonia's independence referendum. In post-referendum disputes, they challenge the result. British courts dismissed post-referendum challenges of the Brexit referendum. International tribunals have traditionally not interfered with referendum disputes. In 2021, the European Court of Human Rights extended its jurisdiction to referendums in its judgment, Toplak and Mrakom, Slovenia, initiated by two disabled voters over polling place access. Criticisms. Criticism of populist aspect. In political governance, states that voters in a referendum are more likely to be driven by transient whims than by careful deliberation, or that they are not sufficiently informed to make decisions on complicated or technical issues. Also, voters might be swayed by propaganda, strong personalities, intimidation, and expensive advertising campaigns. James Madison argued that direct democracy is the tyranny of the majority. Some opposition to the referendum has arisen from its use by dictators such as Adolf Hitler and Benito Mussolini, who, it is argued, used the plebiscite to disguise oppressive policies as populism. Dictators may also make use of referendums as well as show elections to further legitimize their authority, such as Antonio de Oliveira Salazar in 1933, Benito Mussolini in 1934, Adolf Hitler in 1934, 1936, Francisco Franco in 1947, Park Chung-hee in 1972, and Ferdinand Marcos in 1973. Hitler's use of plebiscites is argued as the reason why, since World War II, there has been no provision in Germany for the holding of referendums at the federal level. In recent years, referendums have been used strategically by several European governments trying to pursue political and electoral goals. In 1995, John Bruton considered that all governments are unpopular. Given the chance, people would vote against them in a referendum. Therefore, avoid referendums. Therefore, don't raise questions which require them, such as the big versus the little states, closed questions, and the separability problem. Some critics of the referendum attack the use of closed questions. A difficulty called the separability problem can plague a referendum on two or more issues. If one issue is in fact, or in perception, related to another on the ballot, the imposed simultaneous voting of first preference on each issue can result in an outcome which is displeasing to most. Undue limitations on regular government power. Several commentators have noted that the use of citizens' initiatives to amend constitutions has so tied the government to a jumble of popular demands as to render the government unworkable. A 2009 article in The Economist argued that this had restricted the ability of the California state government to tax the people and pass the budget, and called for an entirely new Californian constitution. A similar problem also arises when elected governments accumulate excessive debts that can severely reduce the effective margin for later governments. Both these problems can be moderated by a combination of other measures as strict rules for correct accounting on budget plans and effective public expenditure, mandatory assessment by an independent public institution of all budgetary implications of all legislative proposals before they can be approved. Mandatory prior assessment of the constitutional coherence of any proposal. Interdiction of extra budget expenditure. Taxpayers anyway have to fund them sooner or later. Disproportionate disruption. Referendums occur occasionally rather than periodically, as elections are, and they don't offer the same kind of formal opposition. Because referendums affect for a longer term than legislative deliberation, a turnout and supermajority requirement is necessary to maintain principles of majoritarianism. In republic polities, referendums could be used to bypass legislatures and representatives by the executive body. Zerker argues that the use of the Nazi referendums was ending turnout requirements to advance intrinsic advantages in an otherwise slower and more demanding manner to constitutional and policy changes.